I'm gonna tell you what I don't like is I'm at 1080p like a normal person trying to like run a program, and you're at 1024p, which is like not a resolution that I've ever heard about, particularly in video. And I just think this unorthodox approach, I mean, while it may be satisfying and cool to all your university friends, is gonna make it harder for Xhevat to edit, etc. I don't know. I think it's something to think about. Xhevat, just cut that as a separate thing, and we'll just put that in the vault to save for later. We also have the Thai one I haven't used yet, so let's just cut that separate, and we'll call that the resolution skit.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
Live from West Berlin, it's the committee program brought to you by Cadre Cigarettes, starring Arun Chaudhary, Julia Doubleday, Forrest, Lovette, Fiamma, Meli, Xhevat, Castrati, and yours truly, Jacopo, Castelletti. We now join the show already in progress. Now the doctor is in.
Hi, and welcome to the committee program. I am your host, Arun Chaudhary, and this is another of your alternate study week content series in which we take ideas from the show and actually watch full pieces of content, consume things to listen, to watch, etc. And today, we're actually going to pull something in from my past. And this could have been a committee confessionals because it's actually about making like some pretty hardcore American military propaganda. It could also have been part of History of Running 100 Objects because this is, at this point, now ancient history, 12, 13, 14 years old. And but it's actually going to be part of our ongoing series, The Doctor is In, because with us, to watch it. This will be the first time kind of watching and commenting, doing one of these comment videos. We're thinking about it a little bit like Mystery Science Theater 3000, is Emma Bryant. Dr. Emma Bryant, Dr. Propaganda. Let's bring her in.
Hi there. Good to be here.
Hey, yeah. So listen, on the show, we've been talking a lot about, look, I've had not a storied career, but at least a varied career, working for a lot of folks who people are familiar with on the left, but also did work for Barack Obama in the administration, the U.S. administration, doing a lot of the communications work of the White House, which certainly does touch a lot on war, which has been something that we've been talking a lot about, kind of communications around war. We just watched a movie about the Japanese internment program called Japanese Relocation, 1941, and a very chipper kind of thing about how they're making the deserts bloom, etc. And this piece that I made for the White House was about the drawdown in Iraq. And I would say that was attractive to me because that's why I got involved in electoral politics. I was always a too cool for school lefty. And I was like, stopping this war seems like a reasonable thing to try to do. And so the idea of being able to actually film the end of the war seemed exciting. And actually the inciting incident for I have to go was I saw a photo spread of Kuwait of what it looked like to have 500,000 Jeeps parked someplace. Just the sort of scale of what this kind of logistics is of like ending a war was to me incredible. But anyway, I will shut up. We will watch the movie, but I'm hoping that you can bring your academic expertise, as you always do, to the program and talk about some of the techniques that you see in it. I can say if that's what I was thinking, not thinking, or even give some details from behind. And I think we can do something interesting here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and you're doing a show now, right?
Yeah,
you want to tell people about that while I set this up?
Show called Afternoon Tea and Truth Biscuits, where I'm also talking about propaganda in a kind of laid back way with other, academics and people who are researching in this area, sometimes some journalists. And we're covering all sorts of different areas and, looking at different countries and looking at the technology behind propaganda and things like that. But I'm still, an academic at the moment. I actually just joined the Center for Financial Reporting and Accountability at Cambridge. So I'm quite excited about that, but I'm still primarily based in the States.
That's a lot going on. So we will have to have some more crossover work on that from the academics and the practitioners of the propaganda world. Hopefully we can learn something together and not just fight each other.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing this
Okay,
film.
you
It's
ready?
gonna be interesting.
You ready for some grade A rock'em sock'em American military propaganda made by yours truly? Warning, there are Beanie Babies. There will be Beanie Babies in the
Babies?
film.
Good evening.
Well, that's new.
Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about the end of our combat mission in Iraq. Operation
I got a little
Iraqi
cold
Freedom
opening with
is
Obama
over.
here, you know.
The Iraqi
And it's
people
interesting
now
in terms
have
of
lead
him versus
responsibility for the security
Putin in a
of
way,
their
right? Because
country.
the Oval Office is this sort of warm,
Welcome to a
homey
special
place in a
episode
way.
of
It's not this
West
huge
Focused on the
marble, you know.
drawdown of US
Little
forces.
family house with
All
the
last week,
photos
we
all
traveled
behind
through
as
Kuwait
well.
and Iraq to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the extraordinary work that our men and women, both troops and civilians, are doing as we change our mission from
And I shot this all by
Operation
myself,
Iraqi
by the
Freedom
way.
to
So
Operation
everything that you
Dawn.
see was actually shot with one, little Sony
On
camera.
Saturday, we take a C-130 cargo plane from Kuwait City to Baghdad International Airport. The aircraft included a small shipment of food moving in the opposite direction of the steady stream
There's
of
actually an
troops and equipment in
excellent
Kuwait.
shot
The
that these
military
guys
term
helped me
for the
get.
delivery
This
home
is
or
literally
redeployment
all
of
of
the
the
tens of
American,
thousands of troops,
like
vehicles,
tanks
and
and
incidental
military
equipment
vehicles
currently
leaving the
in
country in the
Iraq.
one highway
This
that
flight
goes
was
down.
the last one for the crew before they
Kuwait.
head home. On
And it's
Sunday,
worth,
we
you know,
accompanied Tim
pointing
Lowry,
out that this is
senior
kind
advisor
of
from
the
the U.S.
drawdown
Department of
at the
Agriculture,
end
to a
of
demonstration
the
farm in
Iraq War
Tarimiyah.
that had been going on for many years at this point, you know. So you have the surge and push in 2007 and 8, and then, you know, this is supposedly the end of the war.
So that the farmer, the local
Right.
farmer has something to
Right.
say.
It's been drawing
They can
down
see
for a
that his
long time,
neighbor
and yet there are still people,
achieving
and like this
success
person
with
we're
this
seeing
new
here, who is
way
a
of doing things.
agriculture department,
None of these
person
are
helping
high-tech.
the farmers with
None of these are
agriculture. Like
new.
he needs protection,
But they're new to this-
and those are
this
soldiers. So the
Tim is part
amount
of the
of
provincial
soldiers
reconstruction
staying
team,
actually
PRT.
was pretty
Brings together
significant.
civilian experts with Iraqi civilians in areas like
And that's what they called them,
agriculture, rule of law,
PRTs,
public
Provincial
health, and
Reconstruction
education,
Teams. It was
to
sort
build
of the new
capacity for
name
Iraqi
for the
government
American
systems.
presence. Was no longer an
Members of the
occupation, it
PRT
was
Just
the
the
Reconstruction
rebranding
Teams. I
of
mean,
it, really. And I talk about this a lot in my book, Propaganda and Counterterrorism, because I literally focused on this Reconstruction period and how it was propagandized. And I spoke to somebody who led two of the PRTs, the Provincial Reconstruction Teams, and he was telling me about, you know, the kind of people that they put in charge for this, because they were struggling to get anyone to go out there.
This is
And
very
they
valuable.
put people who were
I'm
normally
going to invest my own
running
money in
a
this.
gym
If you
in the
invest your
United
money,
States
whatever it
and
is,
got these
it
guys to
becomes
go out
yours
there
and
and
you have
run
a
these
vested interest in it.
provincial. They had no idea what they were doing, and you know, like these, because they were so desperate to get anybody. It didn't almost matter what the skill set was of the people that they were putting in charge. So it was quite a shambles in some cases.
No, I believe that, and obviously they're going to show me as the person coming in from the White House the very best stuff. I will say the thing that I have taken away from this specific encounter that we're watching, though, was because Tim is a real farmer, you know, from Iowa, and just watching the body language there is something about that kind of soft power that is so effective, because people who have the same job trust each other, right? It's like more than actually these folks and their neighbors, like the farmer and Tim were like, yeah, we grow stuff.
That's what I mean.
That's
I
what
think
we
in
do.
some
And so it's
cases
interesting.
They were
People
struggling
identify.
to get hold of people and just literally put anyone in. So in some cases there were, you know, there was a better match than others in terms of the skill set of people
Yeah.
assigned.
On Monday, we ventured out
And so
to
those
the
folks are
PRT
being protected by
to
these
Al
folks, right?
Aid,
Here's our actual
a
soldiers I'm
village
talking
on the
about who are
Yellowjackets.
talking about their
This
change
trip,
in
we were
mission,
accompanied
you
by
know?
the Iraqi
And
language
as
service
we talked about before the
Because
show.
they don't ever really say
Yeah.
that we're here to
Already
do
working missions
security.
like this one with them.
And that we're going to, you know,
Far
that these are weapons that we're going to
Provincial
use for
Reconstruction
something.
Team has provided
You know,
16
that there's a
area
need for
widows with
We're
3
partnering with Iraq to build up the economy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Agricultural history.
It's infrastructure week.
exactly. So, if there's no hint in any of this that there is any violence in Iraq at all, or any need for security, or you know, anything, any kind of combat
Dr.
going on
Then
at
took a
all.
look at some of the female sheep to determine
In
whether
these
or not
episodes that I touch on, I think and we'll see in a second, we touch on that once, which is training, which is sort of the idea of training new security forces to stand up as American special forces were leaving. And I do think it's interesting how it's sort of portrayed as an exchange, right? It's sort of like, you know, we're going to keep the status quo without us keeping the status quo, and this is how. We're not going to make them better than that. It's like, it's sort of this careful
But it's
dance.
also about policing. It's framed as policing. And actually, well, I don't know about you, but American policing can be a little different to the UK. But
well, militaristic is probably
the
the appropriate way to
activities
say.
of what was going on at that time as policing. There quite honestly was a serious,
it is here that the 1st Battalion of the
seriously
41st
insecure
Artillery
situation
Brigade,
which
trained to
they were
Iraqi
having to
federal
deal with,
police,
and
the
actually
nationwide force responsible for Iraqi
people
security.
being left in a situation where they're not really
Commando
still
Corps training.
able to
This
properly
was
cope.
specifically requested by the
And of course,
commander of the Iraqi
removing the
Federal Police
troops
Division.
at that
He
time
requested that we
wasn't
develop our
really
program of
drawing
instruction
down
and
the American
produce
side
two
of the
platoons
war.
of
It was
commandos,
simply shifting it
under direct
to
control of his division
bombings and
headquarters.
drone attacks
Shurda,
and things like
which is,
this,
the
because
Arabic word
America
for
wanted
police
to
officer,
see that it had
federal
taken its
police officer.
troops
The Shurda
out of
behind me
combat, that there were
are
no longer
the
boots
Commando
on the
Corps
ground,
trainees, the first
because this
iteration
had
of them.
become such a
They're more
big
than
deal
capable. 3 nights ago,
that
the
that
group
we're
behind
never
me
going to
actually
leave,
detained 2
and
individuals,
actually,
on
it's
a
kind of hard
short
to
notice tip. They are
to
about 3
convince
days
Americans
away from
to keep
graduating, and they're working
American
on
troops
advanced
on the
urban
ground
raid
after the
tactics, techniques, and
Vietnam,
procedures.
war and so on. They
And
want to
today
see them out
specifically,
as
they're
soon as
going through
possible.
advanced room clearing
But you still had
procedures.
like 12,000
They're proficient,
bombs being
tightly
dropped
knit
on
platoon.
Iraq by the
They're
United
capable of
States
doing
in
complex maneuvers in an urban
2016.
environment.
So this was hardly the end of combat.
Yeah, no, and this was actually, often, obviously, it's my job to portray the facts on the ground in the best way possible and put that spin, and that is my job.
Yeah.
This scene we're watching here with the training of the new security kind of special forces, these people being brought in, who some of whom are former cooks and kind of given this huge new responsibility, was one of the few times when something sort of really did feel, even inside the bubble to me, a bit sour. And I remember having sort of more serious conversations with some of these folks who were like, yeah, this is going to be tough for these guys. Like, they are not as trained as the people that they will be fighting. It will be very hard, and not all of them are going to make it for sure.
Quite honestly, watching them in action as well, I mean, the guy who's training says that was perfect, and I'm watching it and I'm like,
You're like, I'm not sure that was perfect.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure that was so perfect, yeah.
They're recognized by the
Good
local,
luck.
populace. They in turn have now received the trust and confidence.
Yeah,
of the
now,
populace.
and I
They
would
feel
say,
like they are there in their
it
best
is
interest,
in some
and they're
ways
more
an
willing to
object
provide
that is made
information,
for domestic
so that
consumption
the
generally.
insurgency
But I would say that the two audiences, though, specifically,
more
are
difficult
people who
for
do want to see
the
promises
insurgency
kept. We
to
did
absorb
end
into the
this,
community if
end
the
this endless
community
war.
is
This is
not
why we
being
elected
tolerated
Obama. This is a
anymore.
major
They're
campaign promise.
tired of it. They're
But
sick
then
and tired
also
of it.
actually
So I'm
slightly
very encouraged
where
about
it
the
took
future
off the
of
most
the
and where
first federal
the
police
White House
division,
put it out to people
in
the most
Eastern
was with
Baghdad,
military
being able
families.
to,
Folks who
provide
kind of
the
had,
safety and
number one,
security
maybe even
of
gotten
the
to
people.
see kind of
Before
this
even
in a
finishing
more
the day's
kind of
session,
cohesive
the
way
Iraqi
what was
police
going on, but then
trainees are
also
ordered by their
to sort of
commander on their
recalibrate what that mission was.
Although the
Right?
official
Because
change
how
of
you
command
end a
happened at the
war
end of the
is
month,
sort of the
reality
real
is that the
domestic
Iraqi
policy,
forces have
right?
been
It's the
keeping peace for
legacy
some
of it.
time.
Will the people who fought it say
On
nice
Wednesday,
things
we
about
catch up
it?
with General
I don't know. What are
Ellie
some of
and
your
the
thoughts
command
about
Also,
that
we're
kind
saying
of,
nice
how do you
things about
close
those
it,
involved.
right?
So, like, you look at the end of the
was
Vietnam
honored with the
War, and there was a
ceremony
lot
by
of
top Iraqi
anger
generals, the
directed
Minister of
towards the
Defense,
actual
and
troops.
another guy.
So, in terms of like how America, represented conflicts and how it represents those involved. Obviously, there is now, there always kind of was, but even more so now, an effort to respect those who fought, even if you didn't necessarily agree with why they were there. And trying to, this whole film, to me, like, it focuses all around the troops and what they're doing and why they did such a great job. There's no Iraqi perspective, really. There's this tiny little section where they...
No, this might be the closest, which is this is the official, Odierno is actually literally handing the sword of, like, power back to them. And even then, it was like they were sort of putting on a show for us in a way, right? It was
On
almost felt
Thursday,
like a
we leave
wedding,
Iraq
these sort
on
of
a
very
plane with
cheesy
dozens
kind
of
of
troops
montage
returning to the
videos that
United
they were showing,
Soldiers, airmen,
and
sailors
stuff.
travel on
And
to catch connecting flights home.
this sort of
Millions
ceremony irony of it all is sort of funny, you know? And this, again, wasn't watched by Americans much, right? It was just sort of handover ceremony that
there was a time
was almost
when we were
a
getting
diplomatic
into
thing. There
this
was no
lot
audience
alone,
for it.
900 pieces.
Well,
of
I don't know.
meat.
I mean, you would
I think
sometimes
we're
get things like
doing the-
clips and things like
doing
this
good
being
work, getting
used
stuff
on
back to
on the
social repair
news,
so
for
it can
example.
eventually get reset
It's
for the
easy
army,
footage to
getting the stuff
reproduce.
that the war fighters in Afghanistan
Here's
need.
now we're in
Get
Kuwait
it
looking
back
at
out
this
there
kind of,
again so they can
and this is
continue
sort of
on
where
with their
things
fight.
got interesting because you
Our-
sort of
our
realize what the
geographical
military
location makes
is
it
good for in a
so
way. Like
easy
I was
for us
very
to ship
impressed
stuff
with the
in a
people
way
who
that
I
makes
met who
sense. It
this was
doesn't
their
have to
job,
cross the
right?
ocean,
Just making sure that not a single
necessarily.
scrap of anything was left
Stuff
in there.
can be
It half of it would
flown
be
to
sent back to
Afghanistan,
Afghanistan, the
depending on
rest
what it is.
sent back home.
Saves
And it
taxpayers
is
a
just
lot of
this
money. And it
insane
gets the stuff to
logistical
the
operation.
warfighter fast,
And it's sort of, you know,
that's where our
it's like,
priority
this is
is.
the kind of
It's
thing that
priority.
a military can do
port
well,
was the
right?
final
Like
point of
moving a
departure for
million
many of the men and
vehicles
women
across
in
the
their
world.
equipment headed
Yeah.
Occupying
The
a
Navy and
city,
Coast Guard
right,
worked
may
together to
not
keep
be
the Army
the
cargo
thing that
ships
the military is
laden
good
with
for.
gear, safe and secure.
Reconstructing
It's just one example of
and
different branches
you know
of our
farming
military
and
working together
building
to execute
community,
missions
not so
safely and
much.
effectively.
And
Yeah.
of course, you know, I mean, this whole thing is about like how
excellent at.
all the
But
way
then,
through
you know,
this,
when
the
you hear them
narrative
outside
that,
the
you know,
continental
America has
United
come
States,
along and
we're a little
saved the
bit
Iraqis.
more
There's no
versed in the
discussion, of
Navy
course,
going
at all
international,
of
so
how
the two of us
this,
combined together,
you know,
working
started,
with each other
and
and taking
that
both of
there's
our
any
strengths
kind of question
has
over
made
the
us,
responsibility for
formidable
going in
team
the
for
first
sure.
place.
Every single
No,
piece
and
of
I will
equipment,
say I
whether it be a
really hit
Humvee
this
or a
end part
personal
hard and
computer,
enjoyed making
is
it the
carefully
end of the
tracked
film
from convoy
because
to
I felt that let the
Nothing is
focus
left
be on
behind.
process.
Nothing is
And
unaccounted
something that I often say when we're making political videos, people
weeks
think,
ago,
oh, it's always based on like
America's
fear and
final
terror or
combat
empathy
brigade
and love
in
and
Iraq.
hope.
The Army's
And actually, a
4th
lot of
Striker
times it's
Brigade
based on process
journeyed
because
home
process
in
itself
pre-dawn
is a
darkness.
feeling. This is why people watch cooking shows
Thousands
and
of
watch police
soldiers,
procedurals. They don't
hundreds
want to
of
become
vehicles
chefs or
made the
detectives.
trip from
They
Baghdad.
actually just
last
enjoy
of them
watching
passing
process
into Kuwait
unfold
in the
competently
early morning
and even sort of seeing and hearing these
Over
guys
7 years
moving, you know,
before,
zillions of things in a
American
place with
troops and
precision
coalition
and
partners
this and
had
that.
fought their
It
way
makes you
across
kind of
similar
feel
highways.
safe, you know, like your parents
This
are
time, no
driving
shots were
you
fired.
in the back and you're in the back of the car
just
and
a
it's
convoy
raining
of
on the
brave Americans
windows. And
making
sort
their
of
way home.
it's a comforting
Thanks for watching
it's a
this
comforting
special
feeling that I was
edition
really
of
trying to
on the
push.
drawdown of
Yes.
US
Yeah.
forces.
The perhaps or wasn't
For more
always there, and
information on the
certainly
changes
is
mission or receive
absent
a
when
complete
we
video of the
see,
President's
you
Oval
know,
Office address to the nation, go to whitehouse.gov.
complete
And thanks again for
anarchy
checking
of
out your
war,
West Wing Week.
you know, and the fog of war that we saw
Yeah.
during combat. And it gives a sense of, actually, this is stable, this is going to feel fine, this is going to be okay.
In a way, somehow that's sort of an antidote to sort of the work that was done so successfully by the American government and propaganda on the first Gulf War, right? Which was finally selling the idea. I'm a Gen X person. We were sold the idea that war is very clean, but that is actually catastrophic and apocalyptic, right?
Absolutely.
Like war is just someone presses something and you're vaporized. You're like, oh, that seems like a bad idea, you know? But I think they sold in 1991 the idea that war could be clean and precise and bunker busters, and we'll just show you what this is. And then as alternative media and smaller cameras and the war just dragged on, sort of images of the messiness of war. You can't do these things. You are a certain number of people you hit are going to be wedding parties, apparently, right? It seems to be
Well,
like an
and
enormous amount of these.
The second Iraq War, so you know the Gulf. They yes, they had this like imagery of precision missiles that would go straight in through the window, which actually was rubbish. And you know that they were so precise and so on. But you didn't necessarily, I think, until the second, you know, Iraq War, have this like very major effort at accompanying the troops, so the media accompanying the troops and traveling along with the American experience completely changes the narrative away from the victims of war and towards like the competent personnel who are, you know, delivering security and this kind of mythology. And I think they did this through embedding very effectively. And it made the media also feel like they're getting this access when actually a lot of the time they're not getting access to the real picture, you know?
No, they're getting excitement, they're getting adrenaline, and they feel really good about it. This is sort of one of the unfortunate things is how much journalists have sort of come to love war because it's a sort of, without being immoral, you get all the kind of stoic heroism, right? And it is also something about kind of Western, not just American, but the kind of Western ego in a way, right? Because it's sort of this idea of infinite heroic kind of World War II energy transforms in Vietnam, but it transforms into sort of anti-hero energy, but still for the same people, right? It's like the protagonist is still the same. You're like, oh, now it's sort of cool for a soldier to feel bad, this is, we can make movies about this. We can make TV shows about, this is the backstory for every character, right? They had a bad time in Vietnam and the things they saw. And I think that you're right, that that's sort of what is trying to be avoided here. Like, it was neat and tidy, but also psychologically for the people who participated. It's like, no, this was a neat and tidy experience. And I think to mixed results, Americans were overwhelmingly wanted to leave Iraq. I think you saw Obama get poll bumped leaving Iraq, and even these kind of a little bit of the chaos that happened afterwards never really hurt. Obviously, they tried to say this was the beginning of ISIS, some people, and that and the other. But it was the fact that Americans were kind of ready to be done. We're ready to have this closing cadence. Do you think?
But Americans also had this ability to walk away, which Iraqis, of course, don't. And that's the really important thing, I think, to end on, really, is that, like when America gets sick of the bombing and it can stop and leave the chaos that it has, at the very least has a major part in creating. I don't want to romanticize Saddam Hussein's Iraq before America came along.
No, but it was a middle-class country that was obliterated. Whatever you want to say about it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that's worth remembering as well when we look back on what's recently happened with Afghanistan.
That's what I was about to ask you. Yeah, perfect.
Right now, we're like, okay, we're done. We want to get out. Like Trump started this, of course, with I want to be the hero who takes American troops out of Afghanistan. And, quite honestly, I'm pretty critical of Biden not stopping this. Quite honestly, I think there should have been more done to actually not stop taking the troops out, but to plan this properly. And do this in a way where, it's not ripping the plaster off and we're just leaving you to it and we're, going to pull everyone out. We're leaving systems where, the Taliban can just access all of your data because we left it all this was shocking. This is shocking, and it's so irresponsible, but also so arrogant in both cases. Okay, for our own PR purposes, we're now done. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, we usually like if people say thank you first. You have to thank us for coming, and then we'll be gone the next day, but we're going to wait until we finally get that like, hey, thanks for coming in. And, and this stuff does have a high cost. I mean, I was mentioning to you, and I will mention on air, and it's extremely sad, but, Tim Lowry, who's one of the people who I was working with this film, had emailed me later, and he was like, hey, one of the farms that we visited to make the film, some of the Shia militias in the neighborhood, didn't totally like that American collaborating with a local farmer on it, and they actually ended up burning the farm down. No one was hurt. Luckily, this was sort of more of a vandalism act. But again, our arrogance and being like, this is the important story to tell right now has consequences, sometimes fatal, often fatal, for other people, and that there are bodies at the end of this information war.
So how do you feel looking back on that time and that video and knowing now what you were doing? I knew
what I was doing. I knew what I was doing, and I think this is sort of because the foreign policy was something that I cared about so much and was sort of the essence of I wanted to work for Obama. I think this was sort of a perfect moment where I was like, I do want to put the best spin on this moment possible. Like America ending wars being a positive thing seems like a potent and valuable tool to have in progressive communication in America. So to me, this was the opportunity to jump in and do that. I think that I didn't realize that it was not going to be totally a communication with the American public on this, who just wanted to see the clip, as you say, handed the sword over, it's done, and that it was sort of this more of a document for folks in the system, in the military. And that was interesting. And I often say one of the most interesting things about my time in the White House was interacting with military folks who are not a monolithic bloc, who have lots of opinions and ideas about how things should go on. But no, I mean, I look back on this film as being a particularly interesting document because it's sort of, it is the last time you could put this positive spin on it, because almost immediately there was a huge deterioration in the security situation in Iraq. Yeah. And it makes me wonder then about the shelf life of, I haven't seen all these the makings of all the others movies that I haven't made. And I kind of wonder what stays on the table and what goes in based on something immediate, not thinking someone is going to be watching this 10, 15, 20, 30 years later. Right? So these little phrases that I'm picking on in the Japanese relocation movie, right? It's like, that could have been someone the same as me, communications director, adding it in, even though the filmmaker doesn't want to do it because there's one little piece of domestic policy that needs to be addressed, right? Like, for instance, in the Japanese relocation film, they emphasize that the Japanese are sometimes made to pay for their transportation to go places, right? This is not a positive thing, right? This seems horrible, right? You're like, you don't make people pay for the train ticket to go to the concentration camp. Like, that seems particularly cruel, but it feels very much like a domestic policy where someone was like, hey, who's paying for these trains? This is ridiculous. Like some congressman from someplace nowhere near there, from Kentucky someplace, is like, wait, everybody gets free rides to the desert? Like, what are you talking about? Like, there ain't no free lunch here.
It's like people in prison actually paying for their own... this also happens, like where they're, actually working for tiny amounts of money in order to still pay for themselves to be in prison. I mean, it's horrifying, but I think a lot of people don't think about that. And that is just like the way America does things, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, particularly horrifying in this case, the issue as well is I think that was one that we didn't really even talk about for so long.
Yeah.
And it's great, I think, that you're actually doing this and you told people about that farm and what you learned about that. Because I think the problem is that with these little things that were romanticized at the time and then forgotten about, like very often, the news on a daily basis, like you've got new things coming out that are being, spun and reframed and so on. And most of the time, we don't actually revisit and say, hey, that thing we told you about and the way we represented it, actually, this is completely different. And there's a whole new story behind that. We do on the big things, maybe. So we had a lot of discussions about torture. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's huge. But these little, that family and that farm, these individuals' lives matter. And I think, if you multiply that on a scale across a whole country, across a whole war over many years, it becomes huge. And those
language
are the stories
is how people kind of get around that, right? Abstraction of language, the jargon, bringing it in, let's talk about the style of tank it is.
We have no patience for things, following a story beyond like this second.
And, and it's also good intentions, can sometimes go awry in some ways, as I will say. Maybe we'll watch this next time, and maybe this is a good thing to close on. But I made another one of these kind of dispatches from the White House films about the voter referendum in South Sudan when they became a nation. And it was sort of a really hopeful kind of beautiful day. And you saw people voting, and they waited in line for hours. And in the South, in Juba, people were excited. Cartoon people were not excited. But anyway, people were excited all over the place. So it made this, rah-rah, let's get a movie, democracy, beautiful. And then literally 2 months later, there was re-genociding happening and horrible things. And it wasn't like I was sent back to make another movie, and it's just something else was happening that week. It's not even like, let's make sure we never tell everyone how it all went to shit. It's like, no, we want to celebrate the win, and we don't really want to celebrate the loss, and there's other things to do. And it makes you wonder if there should be some kind of a mandate, some kind of a content mandate from inside administrations where they are sort of regularly, like if something is worth spending a certain amount of money on militarily, it's worth also documenting it in a certain way that is maybe even dealt with by the National Records and Archives Administration and not.
Absolutely.
Could be interesting.
Absolutely. Because also, who heard about that as well? I mean, it's not like the United States is particularly focused on Sudan.
No.
Yeah. No. I mean, there's never going to be any revisiting of this and continuing story.
No, it's just a win to point out, and then people can assume, I bet we're doing that everywhere. That's great,
Yeah. Democracy promotion around the world, yeah.
Yeah. Fast forward.
Isn't it going great?
I did not make one of these about Libya. I did not.
Oh, God.
And I was there during that. Yeah, it was like, whoa.
We have to do this again,
Yes.
I think.
Let's do this again. Let's do this again next month. Let us say that. Let's put a soft pin on that. And Dr. Emma Bryant, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us and for watching a movie with us.
It's been fun.
Bye.
New Blue Band Margarine.
On your mark. Spread new Blue Band on bread. Your family's well fed with Blue Band on bread.
Active children use up lots of energy. That's why mothers who care make sure that lost energy is replaced with the right food, like Blue Band on bread, which helps build young, active bodies. Nourishing new Blue Band margarine now contains extra vitamins B1 and B2 in addition to the original vitamins A and D to make Blue Band even more nutritious. New Blue Band has a delicious new flavor. Nothing tastes quite like Blue Band on bread. Blue Band now comes in a new tin.
Your family's well fed with Blue Band on bread.
This is Cross Atlantic Crosstalk.
Hi, welcome back to the committee program, and this is another edition of Cross Atlantic Crosstalk with the Cross Atlantic Crosstalk gang. That is Ellie Mayo-Hagan, director of the class think tank, and deputy director of committee, Julia Doubleday. Hello to you both.
Hi. Hello.
This is a sort of a self-proclaimed change of direction from the people. Yeah, we do have a slight delay that you guys are responding back to me later, but we'll hopefully fix that in editing. In that, we are going to talk about a solid piece of culture rather than politics. We are going to do what Walter Benjamin says. We are going to politicize aesthetics instead of aestheticizing politics. As you know, that is, of course, the playground of fascism, communism, art and mechanical age reproduction, etc., etc., etc. But what I'm trying to say is that, at the behest of Ellie Mayo-Hagan, we're going to talk about Showtimes Yellowjackets. Ellie, can you say why that jumped out at you as something that you wanted to talk to us about today?
I really like how you tried to make it relevant there when actually, no, it was just me lobbying hard.
I got Benjamin in there, the arcades. It was like we were in Paris, right? Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. No, just to be clear, this was me like sort of sending lots of aggressive messages to the Crosstalk WhatsApp group, being
she
like,
just likes
"This is
the
what
show.
we need to talk about." Yeah, I just love the show.
We were talking about it on Instagram. Yeah, no, the show is good.
Yeah, I mean, is it political? I think, okay, if we want to put a political or cultural,
just dive in. What grabbed you? What grabbed you? It doesn't have to be political. Just what grabbed you? Just talk to us about it.
So many things grabbed me about it. First of all, the soundtrack is absolutely banging. It's such a good soundtrack. Second of all, I think, like, honestly, and this is not me trying to sound intellectual, like, I honestly think that one of the things I loved about it was that so basically for your viewers who haven't seen it, I should probably say if you haven't seen it, you should probably not watch this because we're definitely going to do spoilers and you don't want spoilers, you want to come at this. I watched this with not much knowledge about it and you definitely want to do that if you can. So come back to this show, go watch it and then come back. But yeah, I think what I
in fact, we'll put the trailer in right now to give people that time.
I'll never forget the day I heard their plane had gone missing. What do you think really happened out there?
All I know is that what happened was a tragedy. Those girls were special. They were champions.
We're going to nationals!
I used to think all the sex, the drinking, the drugs, I used to think I did those things because of what happened out there, what I saw, what I did. Hello, Misty, you crazy bitch. It's been a while. I take it you know why I'm here.
Okay, I'm out of here.
We agreed, say no more than we have to. The truth is, the plane crashed. A bunch of my friends died. And then the rest of us starved and scavenged and prayed until they finally found us. I think we both know there's more to it than that. I think it'll be good to reconnect with some old friends.
Yeah, I love that it's teenage girls, and I think like what I liked about that is that I feel like there is something quite sort of vicious and a bit Lord of the Fliesy about being a teenage girl anyway. Because I think like when you're a teenage girl, you have a lot of sort of emotional sophistication that allows you to really cause a lot of chaos and pain. But not enough emotional sophistication to sometimes like rein that in. And I also think that teenage girls are socialized to feel competitive with one another. So I like the idea that they all had this strong bond through this sports team, which made them teammates rather than rivals. Because I think the natural setting, at least this was how it was when I was a kid, and this is set in 1996, and I was 12 when 1996, or 11, so I was a bit younger than these girls, who are like, I think they're supposed to be like 15, 16. But I think like when I was a kid, I definitely felt I had this sense of there wasn't really such a thing as feminism in the 90s in the same way as there is now. And when I was a kid, there was like a teenage girl, there was definitely this sense of like other girls are your rivals, and you're sort of competing with each other for like the sort of top spot and also for the sort of affections of men. And so I didn't feel like the premise where these girls sort of left to their own devices become these warring clans of cannibals was like totally removed from the experience of being a teenage girl anyway. I kind of felt like if you take that experience and dial it up to 11, and then you remove the sort of adult world, then you do get like, you know, maybe you would get like cannibalistic clans. I mean, obviously I don't think you actually would, but you know what I mean. It like, I think it sort of speaks to something about the sort of experience of being a teenage girl anyway, like the kind of the rivalry, the sort of feeling that you're kind of, I don't know, I definitely feel like when you're a teenager, there's this sense that you're going to be sort of found out in some way, that you need to like protect yourself. I think all of that kind of, you know,
you're already a suspect kind of in our society as a teenager, right?
Yeah, and I think like it's all of that heightened up like to horror movie levels, and that's what I really enjoyed about it. But there's also just more simple things like the soundtrack, the fact that it's got Christina Ricci and Juliette Lewis. Christina Ricci's character and the younger version of her character, I just absolutely was obsessed with.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so good.
Yes.
And just because it opens with like you knowing what becomes of them. So you know how like far down the road that they get with this kind of crazy sort of experience that they're having in terms of, you know, that they get to wearing animal skin and eating one another and kind of living like a cult. And then it takes you right back to the beginning. So I think it's just really compulsive viewing because you're just desperate to know how you got from A to B. And it like it does it so well, the sort of experience of them. And then obviously there's like the mystery in the present day of who's sending them postcards and you know, all of that stuff that sort of keeps you hooked in. Yeah, it's just so good. It's the best thing last year. I think the best things I watched were White Lotus and Mayor of Easttown, and I think this was as good as one of those. It was the best thing I've seen in ages. I absolutely loved it.
Julia, this is very close to, you know, a couple years older again, but, you know, your understanding of the world of the mid-90s, like, you know, how did you react to the show?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ellie's onto something with like the feminism of the mid-90s being kind of like non-existent, but especially in culture. So like if you go back and watch like popular 90s movies now, they're like so openly hateful towards women. First of all, women aren't in them. Like they're not in them. Like there's always one woman character. and that's a love interest, and she's like very beautiful. And then there's like 10 different male characters. None of them pass the Bechdel test. And you know, this is like every episode obviously passes the Bechdel test because they're just talking about surviving in the wilderness. So I think it's always nice as a woman to just see a show that has a sort of like reverse ratio, like the reverse gender ratio than like what we grew up with. And it's like, it's so like subtle and insidious. Also, I think like, even if you go back and watch like Toy Story, like the first Toy Story, there's like 20 toy characters. They don't even need to have gender because they're toys, but they're all men. The dinosaur's a boy. The like slinky guy's a boy. And then there's like a one woman character, which is Little Bo Peep, and she's a dumbass. And like, she basically just exists as like a sex object for Woody, even though it's a kid's movie. Like, it's very bizarre. And every movie basically had that ratio of like 12 men and then one sex object woman. So I do think that like it's cool getting this media now where it's set in the 90s and we get to see 90s women and like 90s girls doing things, talking to each other. And obviously like men are still a factor, but they're in this Lord of the Flies like situation. So yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a risk for them to sort of give away right away that they all like end up becoming cannibals. But I think it worked really well. One, because of what you said, obviously it like pulled you in.
That's
Two,
the hook.
They're really earning it. Like, it's not like it went from like they crashed and like a few days later, like just for, you know, gore and horror, like someone goes crazy, they start eating each other. It's very, very slow burn. Like, you get to the end, we're all sort of led to believe that like Jackie's gonna get eaten, right? Like, I thought Jackie was gonna get eaten. I think killing Jackie in that way, that literally she got killed not really by freezing to death, she got killed because of this fight between her and her friend. So like literally getting killed by this sort of like teen resentment.
She was froze
and what
out,
Ellie was
to
saying,
use a pun, right?
Yeah, and what Ellie was saying about like how hurtful teenage girls can be, like that fight that they get in right before she goes outside, that's a very familiar kind of fight that I've been in before, where it's like you can say things to your best friend that are, nobody else can hurt you that bad because they know you better than anyone. You know, like they can say things that like are just so deeply true, and also maybe like not a nice interpretation of what they are or what they're like, but it's that much more painful because it's this person who really, really knows you. So that's what killed her. So I think setting that up as like sort of a like flashpoint of like, as we start to go like down this darker path at the end of the season, instead of doing this easier route of like, oh, they're just all on drugs and then they eat somebody, which they end up backing away from, I think was, even though it was kind of disappointing in the moment, I think it was the right decision artistically. It makes more sense that Shauna's going to get a lot darker and Shauna's going to get a lot crazier because she just accidentally killed her best friend, who she already like slept with her boyfriend. You know, like she's going to have a lot of issues from having done this.
It's interesting also in terms of what you're saying, both. Oh,
go on, sorry. No, you go, Arun. You go first, actually.
Oh, I was just going to say that the 90s are kind of an interesting canvas for all of this because it is such a blank canvas. Not in that we all don't have tons of bullshit 90s nostalgia, step into the 90s, only 90s kids will like, etc. But just it is this end of history moment, right? The Cold War is over. Seemingly there's a cultural and political hegemony that is just the way it should be, right? And that the way it should be now should unfettered spread across the world. And this does sound like a very in a very satisfying and slightly spiritual way an answer to that.
I just wanted to go off what you were saying, which is that I also have a theory that, so first of all, to talk specifically about the last 2 years, there's had to be this choice that happens in art of whether you're going to acknowledge the pandemic happened or not. And unless you want the pandemic to actually be a plot point, almost every movie and TV show is just like, let's do an alternate reality where there was no pandemic, because we don't want to get into that. It's like a whole other topic. But that's becoming less and less sustainable, right? Because now it's been 2 years. So is the world of 2019 exactly the same as 2022? Not really, but they're very, very similar. Is the world of 2019 exactly the same as 2025? What about 2029? So at what point are we going to say, well, we've got to stop doing this alternate universe thing because now it's weird. Like, now we've been in the pandemic for 10 years. Our kids grew up all wearing masks to school. should we all be on this alternate timeline, or do we now have to turn right and come and do this? So I think that's almost a microcosm also of what we see in a little bit of a reluctance to move beyond the 90s, because I think like another thing that makes scripts potentially more complex is iPhones. Having an iPhone changes how your characters can interact. Having cell phones, having constant access to be able to talk to each other and post on social all the time. If you don't want to write that into your story, which is itself a sort of character or a sort of canvas that you have to then incorporate into the story. If you don't want to do that, you have to say, let's just write it in the 90s. And I honestly feel like a lot of people are doing that, especially like in horror. So you don't say, well, why don't they just text someone? Why don't they just call someone? Let's just set it before all of this stuff happened, because the storytelling is simpler that way.
I think it has some narrative. I think it has some sort of popular advantages in the sense that it allows for this great soundtrack. I think it appeals to people who are sort of in their late 30s and older because it has that nostalgia edge. But I think, like what you're saying, Julia, I think what I interpreted as that, like as the kind of the role of the 90s in the show, as also the outfits. I mean, they're all supposed to have like 3 outfits because they're all like, you know, got one suitcase, but for some reason they have great outfits every episode that are different. But like, I think for me, what I thought was interesting is in Lord of the Flies, I think if I remember rightly, the boys in Lord of the Flies crashed during the war, I think, because they get rescued by a soldier. And I think it's written during the war, and it's supposed to be this whole like allegory for the Second World War, if my days in secondary school served me well. And I think what's interesting about this is this was like 1996, so it was like 4 years into the Clinton administration, and Blair was just about to win in the UK. So it's actually like these girls were actually just about to enter an exceptionally stable and prosperous period, like in sort of society and politics and in the economy. And so I think I find that quite interesting, because it means that like what's going on between them becomes very interpersonal. It becomes less of a reflection of the society around them, which is like unusual, not for everybody of course, but for
it is blank,
more people than ever, is like unusually stable. So that then I think that really focuses what's going on them and on their kind of little society, because it isn't unlike Lord of the Flies, it's not a kind of, they're not reproducing the wider society that they have like been lost from, and I think that's like really interesting. But I want to speak specifically about the death of Jackie, because I think that's like a really important moment.
I really like that actress too
in the show, because I think she's from London.
I think she looks exactly like young Susan Sarandon, and if they hadn't killed her, I mean, Susan Sarandon is like 20 years too old, but also she looks amazing, so I don't know. If you look at like old pictures of Susan Sarandon, that's what she looks like this girl.
She could kind of do it. She She looks so good.
Yeah, like Susan Sarandon in Rocky Horror.
I like twins.
She's like super young. Yeah. I think like I totally agree with you, Arun, that like that death is her being frozen out of her friendship group, and it is like a sort of metaphor for that. But I also think that is like the moment that we see the real ascension of Lottie. I know that like the orgy, well, the attempted and failed orgy has already happened by that point, but like I think that Jackie, like, because Jackie is like the sort of the team captain, the popular girl who's going out with the popular guy, and she's like pretty judgmental of them all kind of going off the rails. I think that her dying sort of represents like the death of the old order, like the death of sort of social order, like the social order that existed in the real world, that she sort of represented, because she was kind of at the top of that as the captain. And so I think that is going to be the moment in the next season where we might look back and say that's the moment where all the
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's right. I think like she.
Yeah, no, in a graduate sense, almost. Like it's like it's like sort of the you kill the king, whether it's Charles or Louis or whoever. You're like, we have to do this thing, we have to kill the king, and then there's this moment of like, oh, but now what? And like, what did that mean? But you somehow were compelled to do it, even just to kind of clean the slate. Sorry, Julie, I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think you're right. I think that she was like, even in the last the last scene, it wasn't just that she got in the fight with Shauna, right? It was that. Because Shauna is objectively in the wrong in that argument. So you can kind of see it going the other way where everyone sort of sides with Jackie, right? Because Shauna slept with her boyfriend and didn't tell her. But instead they all kind of side against Jackie. So I think that's also the sort of larger mood in the room that came from the fact that Jackie doesn't want to acknowledge that anyone has power except her, right? So Lottie being able to like conjure this bear, that is sort of a challenge to her feeling powerful. And I think we've seen through the whole show, she was the most powerful character at home, right? Like, she was both socially and on the team, sort of like the leader of all these girls. They all looked up to her. There's that whole scene where she like pulls them aside in the party. But as soon as they crash, like really early on in the season, it's established that like Jackie is really useless in the wild. Like she doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't really want to do.
She's not good at stuff.
She's not good at stuff. Like she doesn't really want to do this stuff. Like she's like, like I'm not good at cleaning. I'm not good at cooking. And also I don't really want to help that much. And suddenly that kind of attitude that like isn't really a team player attitude is like sort of turning everyone against her from the beginning. And then Lottie's able to conjure this bear. She's been very, very dismissive of all the magical stuff. And this is like a huge blow to her claim that like all the magical stuff is craziness, right? So of course she is like taking it very personally. I think you're right. There's like this big conflict between Lottie and now all the girls that are sort of won over by the fact that they're literally eating a bear. And meanwhile, what can Jackie give them? Just like sarcastic comments and like sitting in the corner being pretty. Like that's not the leader you need in the wilderness. You need the antler queen.
Yeah, and I think like obviously I think like the real sort of key of that moment is when like Coach tries to assert his authority as the adult
and the
in
man
room and as like and the boss in some way. And then Lottie is like, stay out of this, Coach. And I think there is like an exchange of power happening there between the two of them because Lottie, well, I don't even think it's like Lottie has purpose. It's more that like, I think they are starting to think that Lottie understands the world that they found themselves in and can to some extent control it. Whereas as you say, Jackie just sits in the corner looking hot.
It's not as useful
which
in
is
the
not
wild.
really what. Yeah, it's super useful in high school, but not when you're in a pain.
What are both of you hoping? What are both of you hoping that they will expand on in the second season, and what are you both hoping also they might diminish in the second season?
You go first, Ellie.
Well, obviously, I'd like to see some more adult survivors. So, I mean, we'll probably meet Lottie in the second season. And I read that they were thinking of, like, I'm not sure if it was like the showrunners who were thinking about it or whether it's just fans who were thinking of casting, I can't remember that actress's name, but she's in 40 Days and 40 Nights. With the film with...
Oh, that's an old movie.
Yeah, the one with
I don't
Josh
remember who's in this,
Hartnett.
except Josh Hartnett.
Yeah.
And what happened to him? I don't know what happened to him.
He's actually experiencing a very welcome career revival. He was just in a mini-series called The Fear Index that is based on a Robert Harris book. And he's also in the next Guy Ritchie film. I don't know why I know this.
Oh. Yeah, what are you, his agent?
Yeah. I've got some news, guys.
British people are required to know what Guy Ritchie is doing at all times.
What Josh Hartnett is doing.
Yeah, that's what we learn. We learn what Guy Ritchie's doing at all times in school. What was I saying? So I definitely want to meet adult Lottie. But I guess what I'm kind of worried about is like I'm worried that they might over-egg this cult thing because I mean it's clear that like Lottie has since like formed a cult, right, based on what happened in the forest out there, as they call it, what happened out there, and she's clearly cultivated a few followers. I mean, 'cause I guess why wouldn't you if you found that you were like super powerful and you could get people to do whatever you wanted? I feel like probably a lot of people would sort of try to cultivate, you know, some kind of following if they found that out about themselves. But I suppose what I'm worried about is like I don't want them to sort of over-egg the extent to which like the other girls might have followed Lottie, because I think the more realistic storyline would be that the majority of the girls, once they came back home, sort of like, maybe is the word de-radicalized, or kind of like actually did start to adjust back to normal life.
Just reacclimatize to society.
And then you know, had to sort of live with this sort of bizarre secret of what they did. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, who can actually say what would have happened if this happened in real life, because it's such an extreme situation. But it strikes me as like a little bit unlikely and a little bit sort of cheap of the show if they...
I mean, the Chilean soccer players did eat each other. That was the 80s.
They did, but they didn't form a cult that they like then kind of were in for the rest of their lives.
That we know of.
It's like, because I feel like...
And that man's name is Sebastian Pinera.
Who's that?
President of Chile. Just
ex-president of Chile.
No.
Just knocked
yes,
off.
yes.
Oh, right, okay. Maybe cut that out. I should probably know that.
We can't know all the presidents.
But
Xhevat, we got it.
But yeah, I think that for most of the vast majority of the girls, I think that the reason that they went so crazy is because of they were in a crazy situation. So I think for the show to then suggest that the reason that the majority of them went, well, whereas and I think Lottie is the exception to that, because her flashbacks show us that she's always had some level of possibly like psychic intuition, and certainly like psychosis, because there's some, you know, there was a scene where she's taking medication that you take for psychosis. So I feel like this, you know, it's plausible that she would continue to be in this kind of, you know, this role as this sort of cult leader who embraced the occult. But I think for the rest of them, I feel like that it would. I think that the crazy stuff that they did was actually the result of a crazy situation. So I think I'm a bit worried that the new series might over-egg that and might have too many of them staying in the cult as adults. Mm-hmm. Although I do wonder about Misty. I do wonder whether she's secretly working for Lottie.
It could be. I think that Misty also, she has her own agenda, and I feel like, you know, whoever's in power is kind of who she wants to get close to. So I don't think that she's necessarily like going to be a true believer in Lottie, like in the sense that it seems like Van is really becoming a true believer. Like Van like thinks she's magical, right? I think Misty is more like, we're going to eat people? Sure, I'm into that. Like it's not like I think that Misty is capable of literally anything, and there's not like any morality guiding her choices or like any like sort of deep philosophy. It's more just like, who has power, so who am I going to get close to? In terms of like next season, yes, I really want to see the cult. I want to see what's happening with Lottie. I want to know more about Thaisa killing the dog, which we were talking about. Like, it's unclear to me whether she was in like a fugue state, like the way she does, where she like eats the dirt and stuff, or not. I kind of think she wasn't because of the way she like kind of reacted to winning. It seemed very like, oh, my like dog magic worked. Like maybe that's not what she was thinking, but like for her to do that also seems to imply that she still believes to some degree in this like weird magic. So like, is she consciously doing this stuff? Unconsciously? Either way, it's super creepy. And then that also like folds in this whole political plot line, right, of like, you know, what would happen if you were a cannibal who tried to run for office. Every campaign manager's, I was going to say worst nightmare, but maybe it's every consultant's dream, because you can just bill so many hours for this one. Maybe.
Consultant stream.
Every consultant stream.
Yeah, a lot of hours.
A lot of hours spinning being a cannibal. So, I want to understand Taissa more as an adult, like how much of this, like, darkness has come back with them, because I think that's the other thing, is that Shauna's really, I feel like, sort of the main character. She's really framed as like this person that we really relate to. She's sort of this like every woman, but she does really fucked up stuff. I mean, not only does she sleep with Jackie's boyfriend at the beginning, but like she kills her boyfriend, like her side piece, and she doesn't seem like that torn up about it. Like,
guy.
Yeah, she doesn't seem that torn up about it. Like, she's upset, but then she's also like, this brought me back to my husband. Like, it all worked out. And it's like, oh, did it though? So I'm interested to see what happened. You know, I think they're going to get away with that murder because it seems like Misty's very good at covering up murders. She also lies to everybody else about what happened. She claims that it was self-defense. She straight up just murdered this guy. So all of them are sort of, except for maybe Natalie, who presents as this like very dark, has this dark personality, which I actually think is interesting, because I think sometimes people who present with this sort of like dark nature, they're like into drugs, into whatever, a lot of times that's just not being able to handle the darkness that's around you, right? And it's because you're actually a really sensitive person deep down. And I think that's who Natalie is. Like, she's like the nicest one out of all of them. But if you just meet them on the street, that's not the impression that you would get at all. That's sort of the inverse of what it actually is.
At one point, Taissa says when... I was just going to say that when Natalie is chastising Taissa for paying for Natalie's rehab, Taissa says, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, which suggests that you're right, I think, which suggests that something happens where she does put everybody before herself. And she says herself, like, we're all living on the brink. It's just that you're better at lying to yourselves.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, that's exactly what it is that all the rest of them are... I mean, Misty presents as, like, the nicest out of all of them. She's, like, this dorky nurse lady, and everyone that meets her thinks she's really corny. And she's an insane sociopath. Meanwhile... Natalie comes, you know, she just doesn't have her shit together. She's like sort of dressed all in black all the time, always has a bad attitude, bad mood, doing drugs, going to rehab. But I think she's just drowning in this experience that she went through, and she's not really as tough as the rest of them. Taissa's a very, very tough person. I mean, she decapitated a dog. But again, she comes across as this like very poised, has her shit together person.
Arun?
That's how life is.
This was really cool, and I'm glad that you brought us to do this. I agree with both of you that I think like what will be cool, what will be great to see in the new season is kind of not falling into the writer's laziness of making it a lot of like very personal sort of drama, but actually still like, what are these mysterious dark forces? What is nature? What is, you know, these kind of bigger blank things that I think it's harder to keep going. But I don't know. I have every belief and intention that these folks want to address these issues and actually not have it just sort of fall into Desperate Housewives plus
also,
murder, you know, like
what happens to Shauna's wilderness baby?
There's something more here.
What happens to Shauna's wilderness baby? Is it dead?
Yeah, it's not the right age to be the kid, right? It's absolutely not the right age.
It's too long ago.
I don't know.
I feel like that's going to be...
Yeah. And that baby went on to become Sebastian Pinera, president of Chile. Thank you so much for joining us on the committee program as we address the important cultural issues of our time on Showtime. They work harder because they're number 2.
Comite, comitato, comitiet, comiteto, corul, comiti, weyanque, submiti.
Thanks so much again for joining us tonight on the committee program. You can always support the show by becoming a member on patreon.com/committee program. You can follow us on all of our social media accounts, including on Twitter @committeepro, YouTube, the committee program, Instagram, the committee program, Facebook, the committee program. And you can actually visit the committee program company store now at the committee program shop. We have a couple of things. We will try to get some more. Special thanks, as always, to our team, Xhevat Castrati, Fiamma Meli, Jacopo Castelletti, Forrest, Lovette, and committee's deputy director, Julia Doubleday. Try and look alive out there, folks. It's later than you think.
This was the 8th program in our second series. For more global infotainment from the committee program, click on the video screen right or screen left. Please like and subscribe to the committee program on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Central European Time.